I've always preferred staying in small, quiet places when I travel. The big city hotels never appealed to me, too much noise, too many people. So, when I saw an advertisement for the Hillside Hotel, a quaint, old-fashioned place located just outside of town, it seemed perfect. The brochure described it as charming and cozy, which was exactly what I wanted. I booked a room for a week in late October. The weather was starting to get cold, and the trees around the area had already turned bright shades of red and orange. The hotel was nestled in the woods, far from the main road, which added to its appeal. I imagined myself sitting by a fireplace, sipping coffee and reading a book in peace. When I arrived, the hotel looked exactly as I'd pictured it, an old stone building covered in ivy, surrounded by trees. The wooden sign at the entrance creaked as it swayed in the wind. It read Hillside Hotel in faded gold letters. The parking lot was almost empty, just a few cars scattered around. It struck me as odd at first, but then again, it was the off-season. I figured most people didn't want to vacation in the middle of nowhere right before Halloween. As I stepped out of the car, a cold breeze hit me, making me pull my jacket tighter. The air smelled fresh, with a hint of wet leaves and pine. I grabbed my bag and headed inside. The lobby was small but cozy, just as the brochure had promised. A large fireplace crackled in the corner, casting a warm glow over the room. Antique furniture, worn but still elegant, was scattered around, and a thick red carpet lined the wooden floor. The place felt like it had been frozen in time, untouched by modern life. Behind the reception desk stood a woman, probably in her late 50s. Her graying hair was tied back in a neat bun, and she wore an old-fashioned dress that matched the hotel's vintage vibe. She looked up from a book as I approached. "Good evening," she greeted me with a polite smile. "Welcome to Hillside Hotel. My name is Mrs. Dawson. Are you checking in?" I nodded and placed my reservation papers on the desk. She examined them briefly, then reached under the counter and pulled out a brass key. "You'll be staying in room 13, she said, sliding the key toward me. There was a brief pause, just long enough to feel awkward. "It's on the second floor, down the hall to your left." "Thank you," I said, trying not to notice the strange look she gave me as I took the key. Maybe it was just my imagination, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. I grabbed my bag and walked up the narrow staircase. The wood creaked under my feet with every step, but it wasn't the kind of creaking that bothered me. It felt normal for a place like this. When I reached the second floor, the hallway was dimly lit by old wall sconces that flickered slightly. The carpet was the same deep red as the one in the lobby, and framed paintings of landscapes hung on the walls. The place smelled faintly of dust and something sweet that I couldn't quite identify. Room 13 was at the very end of the hall. I inserted the brass key into the lock, and it turned smoothly. The door opened with a low groan. Inside, the room was just as old-fashioned as the rest of the hotel. There was a large four-poster bed with thick velvet curtains. A wooden wardrobe stood in the corner, and a small desk sat by the window. The wallpaper was a pale yellow, and the ceiling had intricate moldings. It felt like I had stepped back in time. The only modern touch was the small electric heater by the window, which hummed softly, giving off just enough warmth to make the room comfortable. I set my bag down on the bed and took a deep breath. The room was nice, but there was something off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was just the strangeness of being in such an old place, but the air felt heavy, almost like someone was watching me. Shaking off the feeling, I unpacked my things and decided to explore the hotel a bit before dinner. The hallways on the upper floors were even quieter than the lobby. As I wandered around, I didn't see a single other guest. There were no sounds of people talking or televisions playing behind the closed doors. The only noise was the occasional creak of the floorboards under my feet. When I reached the third floor, I noticed something strange. There were no room numbers on the doors. They were identical to the ones on the lower floors, but without any way to identify them. I figured it was some kind of private area, maybe for the staff, so I didn't think too much about it. But as I walked past the doors, I could have sworn I heard faint whispers coming from inside one of them. I stopped and listened closely, pressing my ear against the wood, but the sound faded as quickly as it had appeared. I shook my head and told myself I was imagining things. I had been tired from the drive and probably needed some food and rest. So I made my way back downstairs and headed to the dining room. The dining room was small but elegant, with round tables covered in white cloths and candles flickering in the center. Mrs. Dawson was there, standing by the door. "You're the only guest for dinner tonight," she said, her tone polite but distant. "Please, take a seat. I'll bring your meal shortly." I sat down and looked around. The room was empty, except for a large mirror on one of the walls. It reflected the soft candlelight, making the room feel even more eerie than before. As I waited, I kept glancing at the mirror. Something about it made me uneasy. It was almost like there was a shadow moving in the reflection just behind me. But every time I turned around to look, nothing was there. When Mrs. Dawson finally brought my meal, a simple but delicious plate of roast chicken and vegetables, I tried to focus on eating and not the weird feeling in the air. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. After dinner, I thanked Mrs. Dawson and headed back to my room. I wanted to relax, maybe read a little before bed, but as soon as I stepped into room 13, the heavy feeling returned. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on me, and the temperature seemed to drop suddenly. I tried to ignore it, brushing it off as my imagination running wild in this old place. I took a shower, then climbed into bed with a book. But I couldn't concentrate. Every few minutes, I found myself glancing toward the door, half expecting someone to be standing there. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to a strange sound. It was faint, almost like a soft scratching or tapping. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The room was dark except for the dim glow of the heater. For a moment, I thought it had been part of a dream. But then I heard it again, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the other side of the wall. I listened closely, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The walls in these old buildings were thick, and the rooms next to mine were supposed to be empty. But the sound continued, growing slightly louder, like something or someone was moving on the other side. I got out of bed and walked over to the wall, pressing my ear against it. The tapping stopped, but then I heard something else, a low, whispering sound, like a voice speaking in a language I didn't understand. My pulse quickened, and I stepped back, my skin crawling. Something was definitely not right. Just as I was about to turn away from the wall, the heater suddenly flickered and went out. The room plunged into cold darkness, and I felt a presence behind me, like someone was standing just inches away. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room, bathed in shadow. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and used its flashlight to check the heater. It wasn't working. The temperature had dropped even more, and I could see my breath in the air. That's when I heard it again. The tapping, now coming from the wardrobe. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I stared at the wardrobe, my heart racing. The tapping continued, growing louder, like something inside was trying to get out. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the wardrobe door. Slowly, I opened it. The inside was empty, just as I had left it earlier. But the tapping didn't stop. It was still there, now louder than ever, echoing through the room. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. For a long moment, I stood there, frozen in place, waiting for something to happen. But the room was silent again. No tapping, no whispering. Just the soft creaking of the old building around me. I let out a shaky breath and backed away from the wardrobe. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, I thought. Maybe it was just the old building settling or the wind outside. But as I climbed back into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong with this place. Something unseen, something that didn't want me here. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint whispers, felt a cold presence near me. But when I turned on the light, the room was always empty. The next morning, I decided to cut my stay short. There was no way I was spending another night in that hotel. When I went downstairs to check out, Mrs. Dawson was at the reception desk, just as calm and composed as the day before. "Leaving so soon?" she asked, her voice polite. But there was something unsettling in the way she looked at me, like she knew exactly why I was leaving. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Something came up, I have to go." She nodded and handed me my bill. "I hope you had a pleasant stay," she said, though her eyes told me she knew the truth. As I walked out of the hotel, I glanced back one last time at the old building. The windows stared back at me, dark and empty, like the eyes of something ancient and unseen. I never told anyone about what happened at Hillside Hotel. Who would believe me anyway? But I know what I felt. I know what I heard. And I know that something is still there, in room 13, waiting for the next guest. My name is Michael, and I've always been drawn to quiet places, especially when I need to escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life. After a long and stressful month at work, I decided to treat myself to a weekend getaway. That's how I found the Redwood Inn, a charming hotel nestled in a small town surrounded by towering trees. It looked like the perfect spot to unwind and recharge. As I drove up to the inn, the road wound through a dense forest, sunlight filtering through the leaves. The inn itself was an old wooden building with a rustic sign that read Redwood Inn. Ivy climbed the walls, and the porch had a few rocking chairs that creaked softly in the breeze. I could already feel the tension of the week melting away. The lobby was cozy, filled with the scent of pine and fresh coffee. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting a warm glow over the room. Behind the front desk stood a woman in her 50s, her warm smile instantly putting me at ease. "Welcome to Redwood Inn. I'm Mrs. Hargrove. How can I help you today?" she said, her voice soft and inviting. "I have a reservation for the weekend," I replied, handing her my ID. "Ah, yes, room 7, right this way." She handed me an old-fashioned brass key and motioned for me to follow her down a narrow hallway. As we walked, I noticed the walls were adorned with photographs of previous guests. Their smiles seemed to linger in the air, creating an atmosphere that felt both welcoming and oddly nostalgic. Mrs. Hargrove opened the door to room 7, and I stepped inside. The room was exactly what I had hoped for: a large window overlooking the forest, a wooden desk in the corner, and a thick quilt draped over the bed. The rustic charm of the place made me feel right at home. "This will be your sanctuary for the weekend," Mrs. Hargrove said, still smiling. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to let me know. Enjoy your stay." After unpacking my things, I decided to explore the inn. The hallway was lined with doors, each leading to different rooms. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The only sounds were the soft creaks of the wooden floor and the distant rustling of leaves outside. I walked downstairs to the dining area, where breakfast was served in the morning. The room was filled with mismatched furniture and vintage decor, giving it a homey feel. I poured myself a cup of coffee and took a seat by the window. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. But as I enjoyed my breakfast, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The atmosphere felt heavy, almost as if the walls held secrets. I shrugged it off as nerves and finished my meal. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a hike in the nearby woods. The trails were beautiful, winding through the trees and leading to a small, peaceful lake. I spent hours wandering, feeling completely at ease. But as the sun began to set, I realized it was time to head back. When I returned to the inn, the sky had turned a deep shade of orange, and shadows crept along the ground. I felt a strange sense of foreboding as I entered the building. The lobby was empty, and Mrs. Hargrove was nowhere to be found. I decided to head up to my room. As I climbed the stairs, I heard a faint sound, like someone whispering. I paused, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. It seemed to come from one of the rooms down the hallway. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached the door. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to hear. The whispering grew louder, but I couldn't make out any words. Just as I was about to knock, the sound abruptly stopped, leaving me in silence. Feeling uneasy, I backed away and headed to my room. I locked the door behind me, trying to shake off the odd feeling that had settled in my stomach. That night, I tried to relax with a book, but the whispering returned, this time coming from the walls. It was soft, almost melodic, but there was something unsettling about it. I could feel the chill in the air as I pulled the quilt tighter around me. Suddenly, the heater in the room turned off, plunging the space into cold darkness. I grabbed my phone, using the flashlight to illuminate the corners of the room. Shadows danced along the walls, and I could feel my heart racing. Just then, I heard a loud thump from the closet. My breath caught in my throat as I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I walked over and opened the closet door, revealing nothing but empty space. Shaking, I returned to bed, convinced that my mind was playing tricks on me. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whispers again, echoing through the room. It was as if something was trying to reach me. The next morning, I decided to confront Mrs. Hargrove about the strange occurrences. After breakfast, I found her in the lobby. "Good morning, Mrs. Hargrove. I hope you don't mind me asking, but is this place haunted?" I asked, half joking but serious at the same time. She looked at me, her expression shifting to one of concern. "Some people believe it is," she admitted. "There have been stories about the inn for years. They say it's home to the spirits of those who once stayed here." "What kind of stories?" I pressed, my curiosity piqued. She hesitated, glancing around as if to ensure no one was listening. "Some say a family died in a fire many years ago, and their spirits linger in the inn. Others have reported hearing whispers or seeing shadows moving in the hallways." A chill ran down my spine. "I heard whispers last night," I confessed. Mrs. Hargrove's face grew solemn. "You're not the first. Just remember, they mean no harm, they're just lost." Feeling a mixture of fear and fascination, I decided to stay another night. I couldn't leave without experiencing more of this place. That evening, I ventured outside to explore the grounds. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the forest transformed into a shadowy realm. I walked along the path that led to the lake, my mind racing with thoughts of the whispers and the stories Mrs. Hargrove had shared. As I approached the water, I felt a sudden chill, and the air grew thick around me. I turned to head back, but something caught my eye, a figure standing near the edge of the trees. It was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned dress, her hair cascading down her back. She seemed to be looking directly at me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move or respond. I took a cautious step closer, but as I reached the tree line, she vanished into thin air. I stumbled back, heart racing. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I stood frozen in place, trying to comprehend what I had just seen. It felt as though the woods were alive, watching me. When I returned to the inn, I rushed upstairs, locking the door behind me. I couldn't shake the image of the woman from my mind. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon me. The night passed in a haze of fear and sleeplessness. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard the whispers again, louder this time, as if they were surrounding me. The shadows in the room grew darker, and I could see shapes moving in the corners of my vision. Suddenly, the temperature dropped dramatically, and I could see my breath in the air. I shot up in bed, panic rising within me. The whispers grew more frantic, and I could feel a presence hovering near the foot of the bed. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the dark corners of the room. My heart raced as I scanned the area, but there was nothing there, just the eerie stillness of the night. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow darting across the wall. I turned to look, but it was gone. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the whispers had ceased, replaced by an unsettling silence. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the edge of the bed, too terrified to sleep. When morning finally came, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I was determined to check out and leave this place behind. As I packed my things, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I hurried downstairs, my heart racing, and found Mrs. Hargrove in the lobby. "Good morning. I hope you enjoyed your stay," she said cheerfully. "I need to check out," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's time for me to go." She nodded, her expression turning serious. "I understand, it's not for everyone. But remember, the spirits here are not malevolent. They just want to be remembered." I took my key and hurried out of the inn, feeling a sense of urgency. As I stepped outside, I glanced back at the Redwood Inn one last time. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, almost as if they were reaching for me. Driving away, I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. I was glad to be leaving, but I couldn't shake the memory of the woman in the dress or the whispers that haunted. My name was Lily. My boyfriend Jake and I decided to spend a weekend at an old hotel called the Grand Willow. It looked beautiful from the outside, but the locals said it was haunted. Jake didn't believe in ghosts, but I was a little nervous. As soon as we entered our room, I felt something strange. The air was cold, and shadows seemed to move on the walls. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination. That night, while Jake was watching TV, I heard a soft whisper coming from the bathroom. I walked over, heart pounding, and opened the door, but it was empty. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Lily, are you okay?" Jake called out. "I'm fine," I answered, though I wasn't so sure. The whispers continued, and I felt a presence in the room, as if someone was watching us. The next day, we decided to explore the hotel. In the hallway, I saw an old photograph of a woman dressed in clothes from long ago. Her face was sad, and I felt a strange connection to her, but Jake wanted to leave. That night, as we tried to sleep, we heard loud banging noises. It sounded like someone was knocking on our door. Jake opened it, but there was nobody there. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice shaking. But as we started packing, the lights flickered and the air grew colder. I could see my breath. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, trapping us inside. The whispers grew louder, filling the room with dread. We held onto each other, terrified. Then, the figure of the sad woman from the photograph appeared before us. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, and she pointed toward the corner of the room. I felt a pull, as if she wanted to show us something. I took a step forward, and Jake grabbed my arm. "Don't, we need to leave," he shouted. But I couldn't resist. I moved closer to the woman, who began to fade away. Just before she disappeared completely, I heard her whisper, "Help me." I realized that the woman was trapped, just like us. If we didn't help her, we might never escape. Gathering my courage, I called out, "What do you need?" The room went silent. Suddenly, the lights turned on, and I felt a warmth envelop us. The woman smiled softly before vanishing. In that moment, we felt a rush of air, and the door creaked open. We ran out of the room, not looking back. As we hurried through the hotel, I glanced at the photograph one last time. The woman was gone, and in her place was a bright light. We never returned to the Grand Willow, but I always remembered the woman. I hoped she found peace at last.